To review for those that just joined us a couple of housekeeping items. Please ensure that your microphone is muted through the duration of this presentation so that we can minimize as many interruptions and disruptions as possible. My mic obviously is not muted. I have 3 little children somewhere in the house, and so I'm hoping we won't be interrupted by them. Also, full disclosure this evening, we have had 2 things. My original computer crashed, so I have a third party that's kind of doing some of the technical things behind the scenes for me. So bear with us as we work out those details. And my understanding is that wherever Brandon does live, that there is a thunderstorm. So let's keep our fingers crossed that he remains with power through this presentation. So welcome everyone. I am Becky Facina. I am with Alliance Health. I am their community education specialist. I should also mention that this is going to be recorded. So for those of you that jump on late or that have to leave early, you'll be able to access the presentation later online. And again, I am their community education specialist. Tonight we are going to be discussing and presenting developing emotional language through trauma-informed lenses. Pretty lengthy title, but really important information. I want to first and foremost thank Crystal Bullard for reaching out and making this presentation possible this evening. And a special thank you to Destiny International Ministries for allowing us to open the registration to the greater public. We really value your partnership, and I certainly look forward to working with you in the future. So let's talk a little bit about Alliance. Alliance is the local management entity managed care organization for behavioral health care in Durham, Wake, Cumberland, and Johnston County. So we have 4 locations. We serve approximately 471,000 Medicaid eligible and uninsured individuals amongst a total population of about 1.7 million people. And what we do is we manage the network of providers, but we also ensure that quality care is received, as well as help individuals access care and navigate systems. And you can see right there on your screen, we do have a 24-hour access and information line, and that number is available to you at 1-800-510-9132. So one other, before we even jump even further, one other thing we're going to do tonight is there are a couple features, a couple kind of question and answer type moments we'll have during the presentation. So make sure that you're using that chat bar and that chat function. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. And we will kind of banter back and forth in a couple of slides. So please feel free to utilize that chat function. We will hold questions and comments towards the end. I'm hoping we will have some time at the end to go over, again, questions or comments. So tonight, our learning objectives. What I really hope for you all to gain this evening is that, we're going to only scratch the surface when it comes to trauma. There's so much information out there, and we can do a much, much deeper dive with a lot more time over several days about trauma. But what I want you to know by the end of tonight's training, I hope that you'll be able to recognize 3 surface behaviors, identify emotional language, list 4 parenting styles, and then understand 4 communication styles, because what we're really going to talk about is how language and communication really can impact outcomes. So trauma. Trauma can stem from many sources, such as child abuse or neglect, accidents and natural disasters, grief and loss. And when we look at what we're living through right now, the COVID-19 pandemic actually falls under cultural, intergenerational, and historical trauma. And so when you think back to generations ago, or you talk to our elderly or grandmothers or grandparents, that they oftentimes talk about the Great Depression and the traumas that they sustained from that intergenerational and historical trauma. And we really need to be focused and paying a lot of attention on the trauma that is being caused by COVID-19 and the pandemic. And trauma-informed care recognizes the impact of trauma on the developing cognition. So when we look at trauma-informed care, what is it? So trauma-informed care realizes the widespread impact of trauma, and it understands potential paths for recovery. okay, that we can recover from trauma. It recognizes the signs and symptoms of trauma in those involved with the system. And so we'll be looking at some of those signs and symptoms, particularly through behaviors, okay, and what those behaviors may look like. Responds by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices. And that's across lots of different systems. That's, you know, our police departments, that's our schools, that's our medical professionals. How do we look at policies and procedures and practices around trauma? And then seeks to actively resist re-traumatization. And that's a big one, especially for our young people that have suffered trauma, in terms of having to retell that story over and over again. That's re-traumatization. And so tonight, you know, if you look at this, this graph here, this is the components of trauma-informed care. And they all overlap, little bits and pieces of each other. They do overlap. But this training tonight focuses on teaching emotional regulation through communication. And so we're going to look at that kind of middle blue color, supporting and teaching emotional regulation. And really and truly how our efforts in communication, how our styles around communication, how our parenting styles and our caregiving styles really impact this. So when we look at behaviors, behaviors don't tell the whole story. It's only part of the story. So just like an iceberg, there's far more under the surface than what is seen. Often we respond to the behaviors but miss the underlying issues. When these are addressed, often the negative behaviors diminish. And so, you know, when we look at the slide here, we look at preschool, right? 3 to 6 years of age, and this child is clingy, they're having accidents. What's really happening under the surface?
So it looks like we may have lost
Yes.
Becky just for 1 second. So we'll hang on and see if she can get back on. There she is.
Becky. How they know if I'm on here? No, they can't see me.
We can see you.
Oh, okay.
Cut your camera off, Miss Carmel.
Cut my camera off.
Yeah, video.
Brandon, can you hear me? We must have had a
Yes, you froze. We can hear you.
okay. Let me get back to my screen here, because I can only see what you're seeing. I can't see my screen now. Bear with us, guys. Let me, okay. So, Brandon, are you looking at the screen that says internal and external responses?
No, we were looking at behaviors tell the whole story.
Okay. Is that where I broke up or left off?
Yep.
Okay. I apologize. I don't know what's, like I said, we're having some difficulties with weather. Behavior is only part of the story. So just like an iceberg, there's far more under the surface than what is seen. Often we respond to the behaviors, but miss the underlying issues when these are addressed. Often the negative behaviors diminish. So when we look at preschool age kids, and you're looking at that screen that says 3 to 6 years old, they may be having potty accidents, they may be clingy, their moods may be irritable or sad, but that may not really tell the whole story. And Brandon, I'm going to apologize for one more second. I can't see the slides that you're showing.
I moved on to the next slide, internal and external responses.
Okay. So when we look at internal and external responses, the body has both internal and external responses. Stress has a profound impact on development. You can look at that slide and you can see noticeable effects on the left and some hidden effects on the right. And so when we talk about these impacts, we talk about isolating behaviors, maybe confusion or difficulty concentrating. They may be quick to react to situations, canceling or not keeping appointments, frequent visits to the emergency department, multiple medical and or psychiatric diagnoses, diagnoses with no clear etiologies, suicidal behaviors. So all of these responses to stress. And now we're going to look at a brief video that really looks at, this was from Harvard University, and it really looks at the effects of toxic stress on the developing child.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious, lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
So when we talk about toxic stress, we have to be able to talk about adult experiences, or what's otherwise known as ACEs. And Brandon will pull that slide up next. And what we know about ACEs is that the first ACE study was done by Kaiser Permanente in 1997, but it's been duplicated over 50 times since then with similar outcomes. The study demonstrates the higher number of ACEs, the more negative outcomes, both physically and psychologically. Our childhood experiences have an impact throughout the lifespan. And so as you can see on that slide, when we look at ACEs, we look at those things that fall under the categories of abuse, household dysfunction, other experiences. You then have a trauma response to those adverse childhood experiences. And then we have those academic and life outcomes due to the trauma response. We're going to dive a little bit deeper in the next couple of slides around ACEs. So this next slide, it may be small, but I do have the resources at the end of this presentation. And again, this will all be available to you online. And I will email all of our participants this evening with the links to be able to get this information. But on the left-hand side of this slide, you see the actual Adverse Childhood Experiences questionnaire. It's a 10-question questionnaire, simple yes or no answer, but it really covers all of those areas on the right. So when we look at abuse, they talk about physical and emotional neglect, the physical and emotional neglect as well. And then we talk about household dysfunction. So those questions cover mental illness, an incarcerated relative, whether your mother has been treated violently and you witness that, and whether there was substance abuse in the household. We know that these things are ACEs and that they have a negative impact through the course of our lifetime if they're not addressed at an early age. Some of the behaviors that we may see due to ACEs, and again, the higher the ACE score, the more likely that you will have, or that child will have, negative outcomes. And again, we'll look at the more specifics a couple slides later. But some of the behaviors that we were looking at are lack of physical activity, smoking, alcoholism. We drop down to physical and mental health issues, diabetes, depression, cancer, COPD, STDs, and things of that nature. So when we look at this little boy, someone gave him the ACE questionnaire. Someone answered it for him. His score is 4. Without intervention, he is 4.7 times as likely to use drugs and 7.4 times as likely to be an alcoholic when he grows up. Now, the key word in this slide is without intervention. We can intervene and we can make a difference and we can make an impact on adverse childhood experiences. So kind of digging deeper, we know that ACE scores are linked to physical and mental health problems. So a person that has 4 or more ACEs are 6 times more likely to be sexually active before the age of 15, are 2 times more likely to have cancer or heart disease. We know that people with 7 or more ACEs, and that's out of a 10, so 7 or more ACEs out of 10, they have a 360% higher risk for heart disease, even if they did not smoke, drink, or carry any extra weight. Really impactful stuff. So what we do know, though, is that we know that protective factors really act as a barrier to counteract some of these ACEs. We know that creating safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments are critical to mitigate and prevent the consequences of childhood adversity. We know that you can make a difference and change the outcome for the positive in someone's life. We know that the earlier we intervene, the better the outcome. And so when we look at those protective factors, these are just a few of them. Social emotional competence of children, so that's building up their social and emotional skill set. Giving them concrete support in times of need, making sure they've got one person, at least one person, they can turn to in a time of need. Supportive and social connections, and that could be school, that could be a neighborhood, that could be community, that could be church. And then knowledge of parenting and child development, making sure that we as parents or caregivers or loved ones, that we have knowledge of the appropriate skills of parenting and appropriate child development. So we can start looking for some of those signs and symptoms as well. So we know our emotions keep score. We know that negatives withdraw and that positives deposit. So not only does the body keep score, but our emotions keep score. Each interaction we have with people either deposit or withdraw from our emotional bank, and that's really important. And we know that for every negative interaction, you should buffer it with 3 positive interactions. I'm going to say that one again. For every negative interaction, we know that you should buffer it with 3 positive interactions. And this is one that I really have to work hard for. I'm a mom of 3. I have a 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And it can be very easy for me at times to make that negative withdrawal. And sometimes I do it unintentionally. And so I have to be very cognizant with myself about kind of filling that bank back up. If I have made a withdrawal, filling that bank back up with those 3 positive interactions. It's extremely valuable. So what we're talking about really here tonight is really developing some emotional language. And so emotional language includes conflict resolution. You may not have realized that, but it does. Conflict resolution is best done when children and parents and caregivers use emotional language during dysregulation. What I mean by dysregulation, I mean when we're feeling out of whack, when we're not in our zone. Okay. Words are powerful, and when we communicate appropriately in times of conflict, relationships are strengthened. So we're going to talk a little bit about parenting styles, we're going to talk about communication styles, and we're going to talk about conflict resolution, the conflict cycle, and how our words, our choice of words, how we interact amidst that conflict cycle and that conflict model can really change the outcome of the situation. So let's look at this. Here are our parenting styles. And if you do some research and you dig a little deeper, sometimes you find three types of parenting styles. Sometimes you find 4 parenting styles. I really like that it's broken down into 4. So this is typically the graphic that I use. But let's look at these. You look at the authoritarian. Do any of these statements sound like you? So we're going to do some self-reflecting. You don't have to put it in the chat box. Just do a little self-reflecting. The authoritarian parent, do you believe kids should be seen and not heard? When it comes to rules, do you believe it's my way or the highway? You don't take your child's feelings into consideration. So children of authoritarian parents, that's that one right there in the second to the right, or second from the left, children of authoritarian parents are at a higher risk of developing self-esteem problems because their opinions aren't valued. And we know when it comes to self-esteem, we know that that can potentially be a factor, including involved in ACEs. And we know that, again, the higher number of ACEs you have, possibly the more detrimental effects it will have on you over a lifetime. So let's look at the next one. This one is, do you set rules but rarely enforce them? You don't give out consequences very often. Do you think your child will learn best with little interference from you? Now, if this sounds like you, you're falling into that permissive parenting category. Kids who grow up with permissive parents are more likely to struggle academically. How about this one? You don't ask your child about school or homework. You rarely know where your child is or who he or she is with. And you don't spend much time with your child. This is the uninvolved parent. Children with uninvolved parents are likely to struggle with self-esteem issues. Again, we talked about how self-esteem can really be detrimental to a child and turn into toxic stress. And toxic stress then is an ACE. So where do we want to fall? We want to fall in that category all the way to the left, that authoritative category. And so does this sound like you? Do you put a lot of effort into creating and maintaining a positive relationship with your child? Do you explain the reasons behind your rules? Do you enforce rules and give consequences, but take your child's feelings into consideration? Researchers have found kids who have authoritative parents are most likely to become responsible adults who feel comfortable expressing their opinions. But let's be honest. I mean, I'm a mom. I've got 3 little ones. Do we sometimes find ourselves falling into or sliding into one category or another? Absolutely. But when we look at our parenting style as a whole, we want to live in that authoritative zone. So let's do a little activity, and we're going to use your chat box here. I want you to look at this screen. This is our emotional language activity. And in the chat box, I want you to look at these words. And if you feel comfortable, I believe that this is a safe zone, it's a safe environment. So feel free to share and share as much or as little as you want. But in the chat box, type in a word that you find easy to express. Now think about this. I'm sorry, and I can hear my son yelling in the background. So we feel these emotions, right? We can feel worried, or we can feel glad, or we can feel grumpy. But I want you to type in a word that's easy for you to express. Is it easy for you to express being mad, or being angry, or being grouchy? Animated, okay? It's easy for you to express being excited or delighted or happy. Okay. Great. Now do the opposite for me. In that same chat box, type in a word that's difficult to express. So you're feeling those emotions, but tell me which one is actually difficult for you to express. Angry, someone said. Cheerless or gloomy or concerned or irritated. So it's really interesting because most of you fell right into line when I do this activity, even when I do it in person. Typically, when we do this activity, positive emotions are on the easy side of things, whereas difficult ones tend to be on the negative side of things. So we know that emotions are not good or bad, but they're rather what we do with the emotions that determines the results. Okay, so we can feel a certain way, but how we express it is going to give us either a positive result or a negative result. So we know that difficult emotions, those are emotions that are difficult for you, so being mad or being grumpy or grouchy or worried or distressed, we know that those that are expressed in a safe, non-judgmental environment do not have to be detrimental to our overall health and well-being. I want to make one real particular note about anger and the emotion and feeling of being angry and anger. It's typically a secondary emotion. We don't often think about that. Anger is often called a secondary emotion because we tend to resort to anger in order to protect ourselves from or cover up other vulnerable feelings. So we might first feel afraid or attacked or offended, disrespected, trapped or pressured. And getting to that primary emotion is imperative to begin to deal and heal. So anger is that secondary emotion from some of those other things. And I want us to be cognizant of that. Okay, so let's look here. Look at we've got some surface behaviors, right? So these are the things, right, that we may be seeing from these underlying emotions over here on the right. So think about this. If the surface behavior is aggression, using your chat box again, if the surface behavior is aggression, what might be some of those underlying emotions that's happening there? Sadness, madness, fear, absolutely. You guys are right on target. Brandon, can you pop that one up for me? Yes, hurt, sadness, worthlessness, hopelessness, feeling of unloved, feeling disappointed. Absolutely. So now let's do the next one. My surface behavior, I'm watching a child that's being disruptive. I may be a teacher, or I may be a pastor, I may be even a parent. My child is disruptive. What's happening there? What do you think those underlying emotions may be for disruptiveness? Could be fear, could be uncertainty. You see some overlapping of some of these emotions. Insecurity, that was a good one. Neglect. Okay, Brandon, can you pop disruptive up for me? Right, so loneliness, right? So if I'm alone and I'm feeling alone and I'm disruptive, I'll get some attention. Maybe feeling misunderstood, or again, unheard. If I'm loud or I'm bold or I'm brazen, then maybe I'll be heard by someone. And Brandon, we won't go through all of these, but let's think about destructive. That destructive child may be feeling frustration. They may be feeling jealousy or even sadness. And then our oppositional child, that fear, that frustration or distrust. So again, really thinking about behaviors are one thing, but that's only scratching the surface, that there are underlying emotions given behaviors. So what do we do about it? So it's really important to pause before we react. So you could, it is important to pause before reacting so you can respond to the behavior. Reactions are often harsh. Sometimes it's our go-to. And so we really have to kind of retrain ourselves that it's not our go-to. So our harsh reactions can be harsh. Responding is using the situation to teach and develop appropriate behavior. That's really what we want to do. Pausing allows you to think about what and how the child will receive the words you are about to speak. Put yourself in their position and think about how you're saying something from their point of view. So when we look at passive, we look at the passive communication style. So that's really lack of expressing opinions or feelings, protecting the rights of yourself and not meeting one's own needs. You may hold it in until it explodes. You may not address it, right? You're just very passive about it. But really, that could potentially look like, if we hold it in to explode or potentially implode, we could really be dealing with some suicidal ideations, maybe some non-suicidal or self-injurious behavior. So we really need to watch how our passive communicators are dealing with things. And then we have the aggressive communicator, right? So we started with passive kind of right in the middle, and then we moved over to aggressive to the left. There are dominating, humiliating, criticizing. They typically attack others. Their focus is really on control. But one thing about the aggressive communicator is that at least you know where you stand with that person, whereas the passive person keeps it all inside. And oftentimes you're left questioning, where you stand in the conflict or with anything. Our passive aggressive communicators, they appear to agree or cooperate, but they really disagree, and oftentimes they're willing to sabotage later. They avoid confrontation and they deny having problems immediately. And then lastly, are assertive. And again, oftentimes we kind of lean into one or several of these categories. What we hope to attempt to do is to, in most instances, land in the assertive category. And that is where you're clearly, appropriately, and respectfully stating your opinions and feelings. You're advocating for rights and needs without trampling over others, and you're listening without interrupting. So, when we look at this conflict model, scroll my screen just a little bit, we know that conflict is neutral. And so what I mean by that is that it's not inherently good or bad, yet how we handle the conflict determines the outcomes, okay? So how we determine the conflict, how we handle the conflict, it determines the outcomes. Most all relationships have conflict, so it should be expected, right? Any relationship, friendship, coworker, colleague, intimate relationship, we all experience some type of conflict in our lives. So I'm going to use an example. I want us to really think about this. So we're looking at the conflict, and you can see the arrow that's kind of cycling up. You can see the arrow that cycles down. And I want to use just a very simple conflict, probably one all of us can probably either we've probably filled those shoes in our lifetime. The conflict is over homework, okay? Whether we're a teacher or we were once a student or we're a parent, just think about this and how the response either cycles that conflict up or really kind of de-escalates it. So here it is, the conflict is homework. The teacher says sarcastically, "Did your dog eat your homework again?" Sarcasm can be funny to some. However, it's really insulting to someone without having to take responsibility for the insult. It's rude, exactly. We all can remember maybe those sarcastic teachers. How about the teacher that says, "I can't believe you forgot it again. You're never going to pass the 4th grade." Or how about the teacher that comes into the room? She looks at the student, huffs, and walks to the next classmate without a sound. This can oftentimes be worse than blowing up because at least the child knows where the teacher stands. Which we know, silence can lead to imploding or exploding. Words oftentimes serve as a release valve, much like a boiler letting off steam. So that's the silence and that's the withdrawal. And then lastly, think about the teacher that walks in and begins yelling and throwing things around the room or at the child. God forbid that happens in our school system, but we all heard the news and we read the news, and it has happened. It does happen, unfortunately. So think about that. So think about that conflict. We had the teacher that used the sarcasm, the verbal attack, the silence and withdrawal, and the physical assault, right? unhealthy communication styles, which led to escalation of the situation. How do you think, and we'll use the chat bar, how do you think that child who may have suffered some ACEs in their life, who may have some underlying emotions under under some of those behaviors, how do you think that child's going to react? Could retaliate, they could be angry, withdrawn, that's a good one, right? So if I'm feeling attacked, I may just withdraw. Maybe I don't turn my homework in ever again. Maybe I give up, right? Making them feel as if they're worthless. I mean, even the possibility of, somebody said giving up, but even the possibility of stopping going to school. So we have to remember how we deal with the conflict determines the outcome. So same conflict, dealt with a different way. Let's think about this. Investigative. Hey, Johnny, I need your homework turned in. Did you complete it? Or how about, yes, I understand you didn't get a chance to complete it. How can we make it easier for you? Or, I know it can be overwhelming for you. How about if we take 5 minutes to get it started at the end of the day? Or this one, they work together to accomplish the task. How about if we think of ways to make it easier on you the next time? So think about those statements and what the outcome of the conflict may be. The child feels like they matter. What else? Supported, cared for. And we talked about at the beginning of this is that feeling of that one person can really make a difference, that one valued relationship. Not knowing anything else about Johnny or Timmy or whoever it may be, not knowing what their background is, that teacher could now may be that one person to counteract the detrimental effects of ACEs, feeling like they matter. So you can see, oops, can you go back one more time, Brandon? I'm sorry. So you can see that using those I statements instead of those you statements, okay, in our conflict resolution and in our conflict model, really make a true difference in how you communicate and get your point across. So positive outcomes, it's what we're really, really and truly looking for. When we replace the cold, impersonal, and harsh elements found in our communication with behavior that promote compassion, dignity, and acceptance, we will witness growth and positive transformations, but transformations not only in children, but transformations in our family, in our friends, in our colleagues, in our loved ones. Communication is really key, and it's almost the window or the door to everything. Developing emotional language, it takes work and it takes practice. I didn't learn this overnight, and I'm still not perfect at it. But I really hope that what you got tonight, a little bit of it, again, we just scratched the surface of this, but what I hope you got from tonight was that it's given you an overview of trauma, and as well as a framework and a foundation to begin some self-reflecting in your own parenting and communication skills. I hope that you're able to take some of this information away tonight and look at some of the things that you do in your day-to-day life, in your relationships with not only your child, with your loved ones, and to talk a little bit about how you can make some of those changes. I've listed a bunch of resources here. These were actually just links to things. StopAbuseCampaign.org has a wealth of information. The CDC.gov also has a lot of information about ACEs. You can go on there and you can get the ACEs study. There's a lot of work around ACEs that is being done. Brainpotential.com, and I did a a backslash about angry children. It's a really great article there about the angry child and talking about some of those underlying emotions that are underneath the surface of the behaviors, what that really looks like. And then I want you to take a look at that last bullet point there. It's KPJR Films, and it's Resilience. And Resilience is a documentary that was released several years ago around ACEs. And I urge you to, if you can, view it somewhere. We actually here at Alliance, we have the rights to the film. We purchased a copy and we do have viewing rights. And in fact, as we move forward and are doing more of these online trainings, I'm going to see if we don't have the rights to actually do an online screening of that film. I'd really like for those of you that have not seen it and that you're really want to do more of a deeper dive into trauma and ACEs and the effects that toxic stress has on our bodies, both physically and mentally. I'd really like to be able to show that to you. So that is the Resilience film. And again, that link is there. And lastly, let's see here. Lastly, Brandon, if you can go to the last slide there, this is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to discuss future trainings and presentations. I'm happy to email my current list to you and discuss developing something that fits you or your organization's specific needs. Due to COVID-19, many of my trainings will be presented virtually until guidelines for in-person trainings have been established. Right now, we're looking at possibly about 10 people in an in-person training. I don't even know if we're going to get there yet, but those are some of the things that we're looking at. So I'm happy to continue to do online and virtual trainings for the community and for the public and for organizations. All of my presentations are free and open to the community. Does anybody have questions or comments or concerns that you'd like to add? Please feel free to put it in the chat box. We do have some extra time this evening. I know our last session that I did for Crystal, we ran right up to the hour mark, so we didn't have time for some of this feedback. But if you have questions or comments or concerns, or if you need more information about something, I'm happy to, please type that in the chat box there and I will look through those things and get that to you. And Brandon, I don't know, you probably can see the larger chat screen. If there are questions out there, if you wouldn't mind relaying them to me, because I'm only getting to see them one at a time as they pop up.
Yeah, there are no chats so far. So if you have one, you can, like Becky said, is put them in the chat box, or if you'd like, you can unmute yourself and ask a question as well.
Hello.